The following video has no spoilers for Episode 7. None. It's a brand, it's a merchandising tsunami. It's earned over $37 billion from action figures, clothing, costumes, events, posters, books, video games, theme park rides, and oranges. Oranges? But the tail that wags this enormous dog is the films, especially the first one, which had no episode number when I saw it. It was just Star Wars, a movie about movies.
The return of movies about movies.
This video is dedicated to Miles Wheeler, one of my favorite vloggers in any galaxy near or far, far away. Miles, it's a me, Mickeleh, invited me to be part of his video about Star Wars, so I thank you, Miles. This is for you. It's also dedicated to Corey Vidal and Chris Perillo, who have demonstrated it's possible to earn a living as a professional Star Wars fan. That may be an exaggeration, but if you know them, you know there's a giant kernel of truth in it. Let me start with a question. How old are you? If you are 38 years old or younger, you have never lived in a world without Star Wars. I am not younger than 38. I managed to live almost half my life on a planet where Star Wars did not exist. But pity me not. I think that lets me appreciate Star Wars differently. Not better, not worse, but differently. Every one of you watching this knows who Luke's father is. Some of you have always known. It's probably the most spoilered plot twist in all of movie history. It has to be. The spoiler in chief is George Lucas himself. In 1980, he went to extraordinary lengths to keep it a secret, even from members of the cast and crew. Nevertheless, in 1994, he began developing 3 expensive and painful movies whose entire narrative arc is crafted to spoil the shock of learning who Luke's father is. I come from a time when nobody knew, not even George Lucas himself. Every one of you watching this can hum the John Williams Star Wars theme. It might be playing in your head right now. Some of you even know the Bill Murray lyrics. But I come from a time when that music had never been heard, never been played, never been composed, not even commissioned. Talk like Yoda, every one of you can. But from a time no one could come I. And yet Star Wars has been in my head longer than it's been in yours, unless you worked on it or saw an advanced preview. I saw Star Wars on opening day in 1977 in Boston, first showing. A day when only 32 theaters in all the world had the film. By the time I took my seat in the theater, I had spent 34 years and 22 days in a world without Star Wars. Without Star Wars movies, without Star Wars merchandise, without Star Wars novels, comics, and video games. Well, 1 novel came out before the movie, and 2 comics. Without Hardware Wars, Spaceballs, Family Guy, or Robot Chicken Star Wars parodies. Without Clerks examining the morality and politics of blowing up the Death Star 2 construction workers. I also grew up without any Star Wars catchphrases echoing through the canyons of the culture. Not a single one. Not, let the Wookiee win. Not, I've got a bad feeling about this. Not, these aren't the droids you're looking for. Not, do or do not, there is no try. Not, into the garbage chute, flyboy. Not, I am your father. I heard all of those for the first time from the screen, the big screen. Because I didn't grow up with parents who sat me down and slipped Star Wars into a home video player. There were no home video players when I was growing up. I did not grow up with Star Wars figures on my shelves, Star Wars posters on my wall, or Star Wars images on my bed sheets. Unlike most of you, I did not know the names of the characters, the planets, the spacecraft, the droids, or the weapons until I actually saw the movie. And even then, I didn't know the name of Luke's planet, because George Lucas neglected to mention it until Return of the Jedi. I was, in short, a 34-year-old virgin. I had an experience that only some of you have had, and no earthling will ever have again. I saw Star Wars as a movie. A brand new movie, but only a movie, not an industry, not a phenomenon, not, if I may say it, a force. Here's all I knew as the lights dimmed in the Charles Theater in Boston on the afternoon of Wednesday, May 25th, 1977. I'd seen the poster. I'd seen an ad in the newspaper, an ad in Rolling Stone. I knew this was a movie from George Lucas. He was the guy who made American Graffiti, which I loved, and THX 1138, which I admired the look of. I knew Alec Guinness was in it. Don't remember if I'd seen the trailer. I knew it was science fiction, sort of. I knew it had some buzz. That's pretty much all I knew. Here's what I saw, here's what I heard. The theater was less than half full. I would like to repeat that. The theater was less than half full. First showing of Star Wars on the North American continent in Boston. No queue. You could just walk up to the box office, buy a ticket, and sit anywhere. Lights dimmed, some trailers, and then the 20th Century Fox opening fanfare and logo, and then the so-called CinemaScope extension of the fanfare over the Lucasfilm Limited credit. There's your first 19 seconds of the film. Cool, but nothing extraordinary. and then these words in blue over silence for 5 seconds. Those words run in front of every Star Wars film, which by now I think lessens their impact. They've become part of the ritual. They're reassurance. But when Star Wars was a new thing, those words were not ritual, they were information. I remember seeing them and being just a bit puzzled. A long time ago? Wait, so this is set in the past? Clearly this movie will not be typical science fiction. It's not like Planet of the Apes or 2001. This is not a story of Earth's future, humanity's future. Those words are a gateway to a fantasy, to imagination. Those words announce, I'm going to tell you a story. They are, in essence, once upon a time, but flavored with stardust. Those words were a brilliant choice by George Lucas. They set the stage precisely and concisely. I learned later that when poet Allen Ginsberg saw those words on a screen, he turned to his companion, writer Steve Silberman, and said,
Thank God, now I don't have to worry about it.
And then comes the Star Wars logo, jamming the screen corner to corner, then flying away from us into infinity as the John Williams fanfare plays. We're barely 30 seconds in and it's already getting tingly. The crawl begins. It is a period of civil war. It's an old movie trope from a 1940s Flash Gordon serial. And that march, that music's not modern, not electronic, not rock. It's symphonic in the European style of Korngold's score for The Adventures of Robin Hood, Bernard Herrmann's score for The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Korngold again, King's Row. It's old-time movie music. I have a good feeling about this, and so far all I'm seeing is words and logos. We are less than 2 minutes in. And then the action begins. Camera tilts down, a moon, a second moon, a planet horizon curving at the bottom of the screen. In flies a spaceship, firing and taking fire, and then the point of a wedge enters at the top of the screen. It's a second ship, firing at the first. And the wedge keeps pushing in, growing until that second ship is impossibly huge. By the time we see it all, it fills more than half the screen, almost 2/3 of the screen. We're 2.5 minutes in. I'm hooked. From start to finish, there's something comfortably old-fashioned about this movie. The crawl, the wipes, the irises. The archetypical characters, a hero, a princess, a villain, a rogue, a mentor, a pair of comedy sidekicks. The situations, even the style, are pure movie. It was a Western, a World War II aviation movie, a samurai film, a kid's serial, and that's no accident. For years, as a fan, film student, and writer, George Lucas picked the bones of dozens of movies to find meaty bits for the stew he was cooking up. Some people feel devastated and betrayed when they discover just how closely George Lucas modeled situations, scenes, characters, even whole sequences on older movies. Some bits are lifted shot for shot, cut for cut. But George Lucas has never been secret about that. Star Wars is a mashup, before we use the word mashup. It's a pastiche, it's an homage. Lucas has talked openly about his influences in interviews beginning from before the release of the movie. Star Wars is a movie about movies from a man who loved movies. He not only borrowed sequences from the Dam Busters, he hired one of its cinematographers, Gilbert Taylor, to shoot Star Wars. He not only borrowed sequences from 633 Squadron, he hired one of its actors, Drew Henley, to play Red Leader. But Star Wars wasn't just old-fashioned, it was also incredibly fresh. The effects were clean, they didn't wobble, they didn't have matte lines. They're as clean as the effects in 2001, but with the added interest of a moving camera. The sound design, brilliant. Ben Burt and team came up with sounds for fanciful animals, vehicles, weapons, and the look was dazzling. Creatures, costumes, set designs from the concept art of Ralph McQuarrie. And the princess, also fresh. She's not just a victim who needs a rescue, she's the rebel leader. The pace is relentless, the tone balanced on a knife edge of not mocking the genre, but not taking itself seriously either. The film has an exuberance, a positive energy that broke from 25 years of darkness in sci-fi. Sci-fi in the 50s, 60s, the early 70s was for the most part ominous. It reflected the paranoia of the times, the Cold War, science run amok, fear of the bomb, fear of invasion, fear of them. Now, there are some echoes of all that in Star Wars. It is, after all, a war against an evil galactic empire. But we're with the rebels, and, spoiler, the rebels win, at least in the first film. I've called this a movie about movies, and it is that, but it's also much more. Star Wars struck a deep chord with people. People of all ages, people around the world. It's a movie that stays in your head. It's a movie you want to enter and play in. For George Lucas, these opening words were the heart of the film. Here's what he said in an interview with American Film Magazine just before the film's release, 1977. Rather than do some angry, socially relevant film, I realized there was another relevance that's even more important. Dreams and fantasies. Getting children to believe there is more to life than garbage and killing. Once I got into Star Wars, it struck me we had lost all that. A whole generation was growing up without fairy tales. You just don't get them anymore. And that's the best stuff in the world. Adventures in far-off lands. It's fun. And that's what millions of people are still responding to. And for Star Wars, for George Lucas, for a planet full of fans, there's been no looking back. Until next time, I'm Mickeleh. DVD extras. When Star Wars opened, the best-selling poster in America was this, Farrah Fawcett. By July, it was this. Topps was selling Star Wars bubblegum cards designed by a young Art Spiegelman, who went on to a brilliant career in illustration, comics, graphic novels. All of the early merchandising was like that, paper-based, books, comics, posters, trading cards. These were easy, these were quick to produce, but nobody was making toys because nobody had ever made a profit making toys for movies before. Toys based on TV shows, yes. Shows came on every week, every day to drive sales, but movies, they just didn't last long enough to build up a market for toys. But Star Wars changed that. There was no home video, so Star Wars stayed in release at the theaters for weeks, for months, over a year. Demand for toys proved irresistible. If you're interested in how that all developed, if you're interested in what shaped George Lucas, how he came to write and direct Star Wars, how his film came to conquer the universe, I want to recommend a book to you. It's called How Star Wars Conquered the Universe. The Past, Present, and Future of a Multi-Billion-Dollar Franchise by Chris Taylor. The creative side of the business side of the business, the licensing side, the deals he made with Fox. It's deeply researched, it's fascinating, and there are stories in there I haven't seen before. Summaries of the early drafts where the story was very different. Did you know that George Lucas was on tap to direct Apocalypse Now with Francis Coppola producing? Did you know that the wording of the opening crawl was honed and perfected by Brian De Palma as a favor to Lucas? Did you know that most of the plot of The Empire Strikes Back was developed for business reasons as an insurance plan, mainly to give George Lucas a bench and a plan B, so if he couldn't get Harrison Ford back for another film, he would have Lando Calrissian, basically a second-string Han Solo. If he couldn't get Alec Guinness back, he had Yoda to play the guru. If Mark Hamill got into another auto accident, he planted the notion that there is another. He hadn't even worked out at that time who the other would be. He didn't know it was Leia then. Look for a link in the description for a podcast with Chris Taylor. He talks about these and other goodies. Here, it's a Mickeleh on Star Wars. And here's a playlist of videos that illustrate some of the sources and roots that George Lucas borrowed from and how closely he followed them. The best of these videos, by the way, is on Vimeo, so I can't link to it, but there's a link in the description. And here, those are some of my previous movies about movies. And finally, all my reviews of movies to date. Bye now.